Hey guys, Sly here, and before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that this is actually a re-upload of a part of a series that I do on my Twitch channel called the Sly Army Tierlists, where we pretty much rank a bunch of just random topics that I'm personally interested in. And so, because of that, these opinions are not set in stone for how I feel about in the current day. And so if you guys want a more updated version of that, feel free to either check out the DeviantArt link down below or tune in on my Twitch that will also be in the description, or check out my Discord where I occasionally post some more updated versions of how I feel about certain topics. And so do keep that in mind. And also make sure to check out the description of the video itself for the timestamps for the particular topic that is presented here. But in any event, I hope you guys do at least enjoy. I recommend you guys listen to this as either like a podcast form or as just something to play in the background. But in any event, hope you guys at least enjoy. Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Sly Army Tier List, but this is a tier list mini, so it's not going to be as long as a typical other, like tier list that we've done before. And, well, before we get into this, I unfortunately do have a bit of, at least, I guess, somewhat somber news. But today marked the last day that Panic at the Disco would in fact be, it was the last day that they were at a concert. They were touring over in Europe, and well, basically from this point onwards, Panic at the Disco is no longer a thing. So I know that's kind of sad, especially considering that, they made a lot of good music, because admittedly, I'm just going to be frank about this. I'm more of a fan of a lot of the stuff that they released back in the 2000s and early 2010s, as opposed to a lot of the stuff that they've been doing ever since, all the original members left and all that fun stuff. Which, might seem like it's a bit of an iffy, thing, especially when it comes to like a lot of people who are fans of Panic at the Disco. But it is just it is like, no matter how good or bad a band is, it is at least just disappointing to see when a group does finally just end, because a lot of the bands that are popular now, they're not gonna last forever. Like, they're eventually gonna finally, put it in the bin and just retire, or just move on to other things. And yeah, that is unfortunate. That is pretty unfortunate, if I am gonna be honest. However, if I am gonna be a little bit honest though, considering, the last 4 albums, was it really all that surprising that, Brendan, the last original member, would finally drop the name? Well, it's really not that surprising, if I am going to be honest. But regardless though, yes, just kind of in light of that though, I did want to take an opportunity to do a full-on tier list of all the albums that have been under the Panic at the Disco name. Even though, yes, I will admit, I'm not, yes, I have a Panic at the Disco shirt, I wear this a lot, and, look, Panic poster back there, because, yes, people, they used to be a band. I'll obviously get into that in a little bit, but, if I'm gonna be honest, I've definitely fell in favor of them, years ago, mainly just because, like I said, I'm not really the biggest fan of the newer stuff. I'll obviously get into, this into the list in a little bit. Because to me, at least for me, I've known about Panic at the Disco ever since, their early days with, Fever You Can't Sweat Out and Vices and Virtues specifically. Pretty odd, I didn't actually know about until much, much later. because they didn't push that one as hard. But again, they're just I got into them around their early days, specifically because, well, they used to be a group that was a bit more experimental, if that makes sense. Like, they used to have they were a pop punk band slash pop rock band, but they incorporated a lot of, Baroque like instrumentals into their music. And I thought that was pretty cool. But then over time, that sort of, sound went away. Well, except for the most recent album. So I guess that's something. But basically, all I'm just going to say here is that I'm going to be honest here. This is going to be a pretty biased list. So if you don't want to hear, if, I put an album very low, I would recommend you guys leave now. Because I'm not going to pull any punches, if I'm going to be honest. Because I care about music, and I care about, the quality of said music. Because, again, Panic at the Disco was one of the bands I used to listen to a lot. But, after the changes, I just kind of fell in favor with them. So, yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, if I'm going to be honest. But we've got all 7 albums here. Again, it's going to be like what we did with Green Day and Fall Out Boy. We're not really going to be like, having too many stipulations here. It's only just the base, well, not this base. It's basically all the albums, including the deluxe editions of all the albums, as well as, international bonus tracks that were added in later. So this is not including Live in Denver from 2008. This is not counting all the live albums, or Jennifer's Body with New Perspective. Although I'll get to that like whenever we get to that. But yeah, no, like, again, if you guys are like not familiar with the mini lists, basically these are just more casual lists on like, smaller topics that admittedly, we've covered, extensively before, but this is just, more laid back and whatever. But yeah, so yeah, let's look at the tiers here, because I actually have 5 here this time around. So at the very top, I've got the Mona Lisa, which is platinum. And then below that is the Green Gentleman at gold. Then we got just mid at silver. And then we got Crazy Does Not Equal Genius at bronze. And then Hey Ma, I Didn't Make It, which is just bad. So yeah. So again, if you guys have seen the previous tier lists, like the modern bands tier list, you will probably know exactly where I'm putting that there, because again, I'm not gonna pull any punches. So, but yeah, anyways, I don't think I really have anything else to say, if I'm gonna be honest, other than let's just get into the list. So let's start things off here with Fever You Can't Sweat Out. Again, for those younglings out there, yes, Panic at the Disco was not just Brendan Urie the band. It was an actual music group with people such as Brent Wilson, Spencer Smith, and Ryan Ross. And they did wonders back then, especially, considering that, around this time, they were like, okay, obviously, before the album actually dropped itself, they were kind of a local Las Vegas sort of, small group or whatever in the Vegas area. And they just got together, and eventually Pete Wentz of Fall Out Boy of all people would eventually discover them. It's like, you know what? I'm making a record label. You guys are in. And immediately they came out the door with, honestly, probably one of the best albums of 2005. With timeless classics such as Bill God Then We'll Talk, The only difference between martyrdom and suicide is press conference, Camisado, the infamous, but it's better if you do. And of course, you know, the staple that pretty much every single mid 2000s pop punk kid knows: I write sins, not tragedies. And honestly, for the most part, yeah, this is a banger album. So of course, we're putting this in the Mona Lisa. Because, my god, this album slaps even to this day. Like, granted, you know, I would definitely say that, like, you know, at least in terms of, like, some of the electronic sounds, because, again, this was a pop punk / Baroque rock. For those who don't know what Baroque rock is, it's basically, you know, string instruments like violins, violas, cellos, and combining that with rock music. That's essentially like what I was saying earlier, where they definitely sounded different, especially for their time, because of, you know, not a lot of bands did a lot of, you know, rock music with like cellos and shit. So they were pretty innovative in that. Okay, they weren't innovative. Obviously, you know, Baroque rock has existed basically ever since rock music has been around, but basically combining basically older styles of music with, you know, a modern twist, modern at the time, it was pretty good. Now, that being said, though, there are also like a lot of electronic rock influences in the album, like a lot of like synthetic sounds, which might sound like make the album sound a little bit dated, but I can forgive it, because not only is this their first album, but even like their first album where like immediately they did really damn good. I gotta give them credit where credit is due. And so, the Mona Lisa, there you go. 8 out of 10 album. Go listen to it. 9 out of 10 even. Go listen to it. So, it's good. All right. After that, you know, again, first outing, really strong. And, well, let's just say Brent Wilson left, and they brought in John Walker. Wait, not John. Wait, not. Was it John Walker? Hold on, let me just look that up. Basically, yeah, the original, one of the original members left. They just kind of got booted, like in 2006, in favor of a new guy who would eventually help them with their next album. Yes, John Walker. Okay. So yeah, like, and they still wanted to commit to the Baroque rock sound, because again, not many other artists were doing it at that time. However, yeah, admittedly, there was a bit of like tension going on in the band, specifically between Brendan Urie and Ryan Ross, specifically because they didn't really know what direction they wanted to go with their next like album, let alone the rest of the sound for the band. But they eventually took a lot of inspirations from the 1960s, specifically the psychedelic era of bands such as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Yeah, very different from what they made earlier. The end result was pretty odd. Now, if I am going to be honest, whenever I first discovered this album, I hated it. I thought I could not stand it. This was around the time whenever I was more in like, you know, a moody, edgy phase. You know, I was, what is this? Vaudeville? What is this? Psychedelic? This is too happy. I need either sad or angry music. I need My Chemical Romance. I want my Chiodos. I want my, like, From Under the Cork Tree era Fall Out Boy. What is this? I don't want any of this shit. However, if I am going to be honest, this album has definitely grown on me over the years, especially in comparison to what we're about to talk about after the next couple of albums. And if I'm going to be honest, yeah, no, I'd put it as like a gold standard, The Green Gentleman. Because this album, for those who don't know, like, not only is it a, like more of an experimental sort of like, homage to 1960s psychedelic music, but it's also a loose concept album based on the, like, basically it's following the story of a character known as the Green Gentleman, and basically his, his life throughout different stages. Or at least that's kind of like a broad sense of what's going on here. And a lot of the music in this album particularly was not written by Brendan Urie. It was written by Ryan Ross. And yeah, it's definitely a different one, especially in the music videos, where, like, especially for like two of them, they were on drugs. Which, I mean, to be fair, this was, again, heavily inspired by, that sort of 1960s, era rock, and like even like the hippie movement of like the late 60s and early 70s. So, and hell, even like older, like old timey style of music, like I mentioned earlier, like vaudeville, which that's a whole fucking thing right there. But basically, they basically tried to modernize that, if that makes sense. And honestly, I think it works really well. I still have certain issues with certain songs. Like, I do feel like, for example, Do You Know What I'm Seeing, or whatever the song is, I think that song is way too slow. Um Also, um there's a cabin in the mountain, like there's a mountain in the cabin in the woods, or whatever the fuck it's called. That one just sounded way too old-timey, at least for me, because like that sounded like more of a 1910s sort of, pre-World War I song, and I no. um so yeah, it does, the album does have some stinkers. Also, going back to New Perspective, at least for a little bit, apparently whenever I was doing research, I found out that on the Japanese version of Pretty Odd, they had a re-release in 2009 where they all of a sudden added New Perspective to the end of that album. Why? Like, I love the song New Perspective. I think it's a fucking banger of a song. Like, I actually really like it. But like, that's so different from the album. It's honestly, it felt very similarly to how, with Deftones, they had White Pony, which was an amazing album in its own right. But then they had a re-release in 2001 where they added in Back to School Mini Maggot, and it completely just fucked with the flow of the album. So it's the same case here. It's like, why did you have a re-release for a song that was a single? It was a big single at the time, but just had nothing to do with the rest of the album. I don't know, but that's something I've noticed a lot about like international like re-releases, is that like Rage Against the Machine also had a re-release overseas where their single No Shelter was on Battle of Los Angeles, even though on every other version of Battle for Los Angeles it's not on there. So I don't know. I don't know why record labels or record companies do that. It's weird. But regardless of that, though, like if we are even counting that song in this, it's still a good album, but I don't think it's quite up at platinum tier, at least for me. So it's a good album, but it's still flawed. Which, speaking of, flawed but turning out to be really good, Vices and Virtues in 2011. So this album came after, well, after the release of Pretty Odd. Both John Walker and Ryan Ross eventually left. They basically like gave up and just eventually left because, they wanted to continue the sound of what Panic was doing with Pretty Odd, while Brendan Urie and Spencer Smith at the time wanted to have like a more modern-esque sound, and they felt like it would have been too risky if they did another Pretty Odd, because again, Pretty Odd was already an album that it had mixed reception, and he didn't want another thing like that happening again. And so they came out with Vices and Virtues, which honestly, it's really not that different from Fever You Can't Sweat Out. Like, if I'm gonna be honest, like it's basic. I basically see it as Fever Fart or well, Fever Part 2. Like, that's essentially what the album is. And you know what? If we're counting the base version of Vices and Virtues, I would also put it in Green Gentleman. However, since we're counting all deluxe editions, if we're counting the deluxe edition here, oh, this is in Mona Lisa. Like, goddamn, like, people are sleeping on the bonus track and the deluxe edition. I cannot speak tonight. Deluxe edition tracks on this album, because Kaleidoscope Eyes is honestly one of the best songs they ever made, and no one talks about it. And even just putting that aside, the Ballad of Mona Lisa, obviously, yeah, the name of the tier. Let's Kill the Night, The Calendar, Nearly Witches, which actually that song was written by Ryan Ross, but they eventually, and was made for Pretty Odd, but they re-recorded it 3 years later, with his permission, of course. And yeah, they put it on this album, and that song is a banger. Like, basically, there's no bad song on this album, because like I said, it's basically just Fever You Can't Sweat Out Part 2. And that's why I really like this album. And I guess my only complaint is that Ready to Go, the second single off this album, it's probably the weakest song because it's a lot more pop rocky in comparison to the rest of the album, which, you know, kept to the Baroque rock roots. Like, this was their last Baroque rock album. And that song did admittedly set the trend for what would eventually come later, which is unfortunate. Like, I don't hate the song. I think it's okay, but like, compared to the lead single with Ballad, and then eventually with Let's Kill the Night, let alone everything else in the album, it just doesn't really compare. And yeah, that sucks. But regardless, though, I still think that this album is pretty good, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. Because unfortunately, after that, they took about roughly a year break from just working on anything. And then in 2013, they eventually released Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die. And this is when we started to have problems with Panic, at least for me. The lead single, Miss Jackson, really showcased that. And granted, that's the best song off the album. Every other song on this album, granted, I will admit this, I'm not particularly the biggest fan of just straight up pop music. So, like, I am a little bit biased here, and hell, I'll even fully admit this. Like, just take my opinion here with a grain of salt, because not only that, but also it's like, I don't really see a lot of like 2010s pop music in a good light. I see it as just, a lot of formulaic and a lot of just uninspired corporate garbage, if that makes sense. I've always thought this, and like, I don't think there's really anything that will change my mind. I'm not gonna like dog anyone for liking that sort of stuff. If you like that, that's totally fine. But I just can't stand that type of music. And unfortunately, this album, you can tell, is time-stamped for 2013's audience. Especially with, not only with Miss Jackson, but also with, fucking Girls, Boy. Oh my god, that song. Basically, this was the first album where you can clearly tell that Brendan Urie was in full control of the music, and he didn't have someone like Spencer Smith checking him. Spencer Smith did still do the drumming on Miss Jackson, but that was his only contribution. Also, he was in the music video. Everything else, he was gone. Like, he was just kind of there. And yeah, it really shows. So, and this is gonna piss some people off because I know a lot of people love this album, but I'm sorry, I have to put it in Hey Ma. I didn't make it. I think it's terrible, and I don't know how you go from, you know, the creative, like, in just experimental vices. Okay, I know why. It's because, well, all the other freaking members left. And so, like, you know, and Spencer Smith had less and less say in this. And so because of that, Brendan became it. This was the beginning of whenever it became the Brendan Urie band. Hell, Spencer Smith's not even in the cover of this album. You can, like, he's in the cover of Vices. Even though, like, he contributed at least a little bit in Too Weird to Live, he's not on the cover. So you can clearly tell that he's not there, and that sucks. And yeah, like, unfortunately, like, I don't, like, I'm sorry, this album just, a lot of the songs do sound the same on this album, admittedly, so, like, I just need to look up exactly what was on here. Oh, yeah, there was also Vegas fucking Lights. That song's ass. Oh my god. Hold on, let me look this. Like, I just listened to this too. That's the thing. Again, I listen to, like, whenever I do one of these types of lists, I listen to every fucking thing that I can. And I can barely remember. Yeah, like, this is fucking gospel. No. This is gospel where it's like, if you let me go. Granted, I will fully admit this. I'm not someone who hates melodrama in music. I mean, I'll fully admit this. I think The Reason by Hoobastank is fine. I know, hot take right there. But I feel like This Is Gospel really pushed the melodrama, and it just, I did not like it at all. Yeah, and then Vegas Lights, Nicotine, Girl That You... I'm sorry. A lot of these just... Ugh. If I'm gonna be honest. And unfortunately, you know, after this album, Spencer Smith left. He left in 2014. Granted, there was also touring members. Dalton Weeks is the most prominent touring member for Panic, and he had somewhat of a say in the music, but not really that much. And that was pretty evident with the upcoming album, Death of a Bachelor. Another concept album, if I'm not mistaken. I don't exactly know what the concept is about. I think it's about, you know, someone that, you know, Brendan Urie is kind of portraying as, who is basically has the Vegas lifestyle, but eventually corrupts him or something like that. I don't know the story, if I'm going to be honest. So, but yeah, no, if I am going to be honest, this one, I will admit this, Death of a Bachelor is better than Too Weird to Live. I'm going to be flat out honest with that. Like, I think LA Devotee was actually a decent pop song. And Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time, I thought was also fine. But I think the biggest problem with this album is that it was too reliant on trying to push out like a hit single. If that, you know what I mean? Like, cuz over half this, I think like 7 or 8 of these songs were singles, or at least had a music video. Yeah, Victorious had a music video. Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time had a music video. Hallelujah, which terrible song, by the way. That had a music video. Emperor's New Clothes had a music video. Death of Bachelor did. Crazy Equals Genius didn't, but LA Devotee did. Yeah, over half the album was just single fest. And again, it is better, but not by much. So because of that, I'm putting this under Crazy Does Not Equals Genius. Because a lot of these songs, like Death of a Bachelor, was just more of a whoa fest. Like, where it's like, Death of a Bachelor, whoa. Like, you know, that sort of thing. Like, it did get a bit draining. Um, Golden Days. Just, I think the biggest problem is Brendan Urie sounded less like a singer, and he just went more on like the. I hate using terms like this because I hate this, but like the millennial woe, where it was like golden day, like basically prolonging the song, like the vocal melody, if that makes sense, or harmony, like whatever term it is, and it just did not work. Again, it worked a little bit better, at least with a couple songs, but like I don't know. I think it also didn't help that like a lot of this album and the next album was heavily overproduced. Like, oh my god, I just oh my god, like when you overmix an album, it just sounds like shit. You're not being like overly like you're not adding to anything. You're just removing a lot of the raw sound of a song, like, and just making just a lot of like noise out of it. Like I don't know how else to describe it, but it just doesn't really work. So I don't know. What I do know though is for those people who thought that Death of the Bachelor was bad, oh, pray for the wicked. I'm an atheist, but I wish I'd prayed. Um, so yeah, I guess with this album, he was trying to do a bit more of a Broadway sort of sound, which makes sense because he was on Broadway at the time. Like he did, I forgot what musicals he did. Um, wow, I feel like I feel like an asshole, but Brendan. But basically, he did a lot more. He experimented more with like a Broadway sound when it came to this. So it sounds more. Oh yeah. Oh, he was on King. Oh god. Fucking Kinky Boots. Yeah, that's what it was. And I guess that's what he wanted to really do, especially on. Yeah, Say Amen Saturday Night. God, that song was everywhere. Oh, and fucking High Hopes. I'm sorry. Just if you like these songs, that's fine. But High Hopes and Say Amen, they were just formulaic. Just they were just like they were just a calculated formula song, like songs like that were like you can tell that they just manufactured because they knew it would like be successful. And it just makes me more sad that people know Panic! The Disco for High Hopes than I Write Sins, Not Tragedies, if I'm gonna be honest. Granted, I know Brendan fucking hates that song, which I don't blame him. He played it for like 15 years straight. So like I don't blame him for hating it, but like it's more unique than fucking High Hopes because again, I Write Sins was experimental with that, with a lot of those cellos and violins in that song. Like, not a lot of bands did that. But then, 13, 14 years later, he would eventually make High Hopes, which just sounds like any typical pop song you'd ever hear on the radio. And, dude, what really steals the deal for this as being the worst album by the band is, well, Hey Ma, I Made It. Oh wait, okay, I don't have a good meme. But yeah, no, it's bad. It's terrible. Honestly, this was the album that really just made me not give a shit about Panic! At the Disco as much as I wish I did. I'm putting it in the bottom tier. Hey Ma, I didn't make it. I hate that song so much. I fucking hate that song so much. Like, I don't know how you went from the Ballad of Mona Lisa to that in a matter of like the same decade. How the fuck are you the same band? How the fuck are you in the same thing? I don't understand that. And it's terrible. Like, yeah, and like it doesn't help that, like, this album, just like with Too Weird to Live, Too Rare to Die, is a pretty forgettable album. Like, I mean, Roaring Twenties, I guess, but like Overpass, King of the Clouds, like, I think that's probably what really makes this just a terrible album to me. Is not only did I hate the music when it came out, I listened to the entire album. My cousins got the full the special edition, like not just the CD but the vinyl too, like, so like they got that shit up like so much. Like, I guess what just makes it worse for me is that not only did I hate it, but I don't even fucking remember it, which is probably a good thing. But like, if your music's just bad and also just forgettable, I think that really is the stamp that you made some terrible fucking music. And guess what? A lot of people who are, hardcore Panic at the Disco fans even agree with me. So, and unfortunately, yeah, no, Brendan Urie would not release a new album in 4 years because of a lot of that criticism. Which then leads us to the last album here, Viva Las Vengeance. Now, I'm gonna actually be on the record here and say that this is not, I wouldn't call this album like particularly good, if I'm gonna be honest. It still has a lot of those like Pray for the Wicked isms that did get into this album. However, unlike the last 3 albums we just talked about, this one was only okay. I know people dogged on this album when it came out, but if I'm gonna be honest, it's not that bad. And I'm actually kind of glad that this was a bit more experimental, because again, Brendan Urie actually, decided to apparently, as his last last hurrah, go back to his roots and experiment with some of, that Baroque rock sound. And you know what? It was okay. And I'll even say this, Viva Las Vengeance, the title track, I actually think fucking slaps. Go ahead, shoot me. But I think that was actually pretty good. I also thought that Don't Let the Light Go Out was also a banger. So, yeah, even Star Spangled Banner I thought was fine. So, in my opinion, in terms of like the post like band era of Panic at the Disco, I think this was their best album. Unfortunately though, it was still kind of mid overall, so we're gonna put it in the silver tier. But rest assured, this was the best thing that they've released in a long time. And you know what? I have to commend Brendan at least for stepping up. It's trying to at least step up his game. It's just a damn shame that this album did get panned severely. And yeah, unfortunately, they paid the price. Panic at the Disco is no longer around. Like, today marked the last day that, they've been around. And again, not that surprising, but it just sucks to see a band that admittedly was a huge part of my, of my childhood. My cousins, just like with Fall Out Boy and Green Day, they showed me, the music, obviously censored versions of, a lot of their earlier material. And guess what? I thought a lot of that was pretty good. Like Vices and Fever being, that sort of, pop punk mixed with, old Baroque sound, I thought really worked, and it gave them an identity. And even with something like Pretty Odd, maybe it wasn't the most chart-selling record, but it was still a damn good attempt at something that, had a lot of potential. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for this tier list, is that I feel like Panic at the Disco just lost their identity. Like, and I think I coined a new phrase. I think I coined a new phrase before, but I'm gonna remind you guys about it. Panic at the Disco was a band that lost their way, meaning that they are a band that, started off really damn strong, and you can tell that there was a lot of passion put into the music that they were making. Hell, they even, like I said, with Pretty Odd, no one asked for that, but guess what? It was a solid strong album. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to say, but it was a strong attempt that succeeded in flying colors. Like, maybe not necessarily in a lot of in every single song, but it was still really good. But I think that really, unfortunately, did hurt the band in the long run. It was just a lot of these creative differences between band members, and it resulted in, more and more creative, control going towards Brendan when, and again, I'm not even, saying that Brendan, is a bad musician at all. Like, he can definitely fucking sing. Like, I can definitely, say that. I just feel like sometimes he does get a little bit over himself a lot, when it comes to, actually making, music. And I feel like if he just would have had at least, someone to, I guess, help him guide to whatever potential they would have had, then I feel like that would have worked in the band's, favor. It just sucks that it just became a solo project. Granted, I don't know exactly everything that happened, behind the scenes. If, there was a lot of just, actual, rivalry tension between Ryan Ross or Brendan Urie, or if it was just a creative difference that they just couldn't mutually agree on. I don't know. All I know is that the Panic that I personally knew was already dead for a long time. And again, it sucks to see the name finally go, but it's not the most, it's not the most surprising. It also didn't help that there were a lot of, I don't want to call them allegations, but definitely a lot of controversies that did happen involving Brendan Urie. One of which we even talked about in one of our podcasts a couple of years ago. Granted, at this point, I don't know. He definitely, all I do know is that, I did see videos of some things that he did say years ago, but, dude, it's 2023. That was over a decade ago, and I doubt that he would even condone some of the stuff that he said. Basically, some sexist stuff that, I guarantee you he probably regrets nowadays. And, just because of just that sort of drama, I don't necessarily blame him for finally just dropping the name. So, unfortunately, it wasn't just Brendan, but just the rest of everyone involved in the project. They unfortunately did pay the ultimate price for it to just end up having a mid legacy. And again, I think I made this particular tier list stream, and yes, this was a pretty short stream, I know, but I just kind of wanted to end on this. Obviously, don't be afraid to do whatever you want, because at the end of the day, if you really want to, if you're working on something that you're not proud of and want to do something completely different, that is completely fine. However, if it comes at the cost of both your integrity and your identity, I would definitely be wary about it, if that makes sense. And also, be aware that there's going to be people who are going to be critical of it. Because, again, I've been very critical about, Panic at the Disco's past 10 years. And again, the biggest reason why I'm like that is because I loved this band whenever it was an actual band. I liked a lot of their older, stuff. And it's not even like really a nostalgia thing. Like a lot of the music that they made back then, I still think holds up to this very day. And hell, I'll even admit when parts are dated, I'll call it out. But I'm putting aside some of the dated elements and acknowledge that, what they did not only was unique, but it was really damn good. And yeah, that's all I gotta really say. Again, I know this was a pretty short tier list. Again, this is the whole format of the Sly Army tier list mini lists, and I'll definitely do more of these later down the line. I just kind of wanted to get this one just out because, again, just recognizing that it's the end of an era, and all we gotta really do is just look forward to see what Brendan potentially does in the future, if he's going to continue with music or if he's going to do something else. I know he's been doing a lot of Twitch-related stuff himself in the past couple of years, which is interesting to see. I've been seeing a lot of artists do that. Yeah, Chino Moreno of Deftones has been on Twitch a lot. Same thing with Jonathan Davis of Korn. So maybe that's something that he's going to be doing on like a side thing. I don't particularly know. But all I'm going to say is that I doubt he's ever going to see this. But in the small chance that he does, I'm sorry that I've been highly critical here. It's just because this is coming from someone who's known about, Panic for a long time. And I want to see, I want to see there to be like, a passion for what one's doing. And also, don't feel free to, go away from trends. Because again, whenever he followed Panic followed the trends, that's when, in my opinion at least, they were at their worst. That being said, what do I know? Because they still have 20 million listeners on Spotify, or Panic, 22 million listeners on Spotify. So at the end of the day, my opinion apparently isn't really the most valid. So I'm just pointing this out because, again, I'm passionate about the type of music that, not only do I listen to, but also just what I wish things would be. But in any event, that's going to be it for tonight. Again, I know this was a very short stream, but I just wanted to get this out there as someone who's a passionate Panic fan. Or was. This might be the last time this poster will be up, but no ifs and or buts about that. But regardless, though, I hope you guys at least somewhat enjoyed this. Again, if you agree with me, feel free to let me know. If you don't, then you can definitely explain why. Again, at the end of the day, this is just my personal opinion. I don't want to feel like I'm dogging anyone. If you guys like Pray for the Wicked or Too Weird Lid, that is totally valid. I'm not gonna be, being like, oh, you're stupid, all that. I'm not an asshole like that. So it's just my personal Panic, or how I felt like, or whatever. I hope you guys at least enjoyed this regardless. If you guys did, make sure to hit that follow button down below and turn on the bell icon so that you'll be notified exactly when I'll be sharing me next. While you guys are at it, you can check out the links down below, specifically the Discord, the SoundCloud, and the Humble Bundle affiliation link. And if you guys haven't already, you can also hit the subscribe button. If you can't do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad that you guys took time to watch this. Regardless of all that, though, make sure to share the stream to other people and continue to be awesome in the process. But until then, I'll see you guys in the future. Bye!